The searing, white-hot punch to his shoulder had been a clean, honest pain. It was everything that came after, the fevered flight through scrubland, the gut clench of hunger, and the slow, rotting shame that was carving Elias Vance hollow. He rode into the foothills north of Ridgeline with the slumped posture of a man who no longer cared about his destination, only the distance he was putting between himself and what he'd done. His horse, a tired bay gelding as worn out as its rider, plodded along a trail barely visible under the new spring grass. The world was erupting in life around him. Meadowlarks sang, wildflowers painted the slopes in bursts of blue and yellow, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. But Elias was a creature of winter, carrying his own private blizzard. A bank in Cheyenne, a simple withdrawal, then the young, terrified teller, his voice shaking as he'd whispered, "I know you." The recognition in the boy's eyes had been a spark on a powder keg of Elias's own fear. He hadn't drawn his gun, not really. It had been a frantic, panicked gesture to get the boy to be quiet, to just take the money and go. The gun had gone off, a thunderclap in the quiet room. The shot had gone wide, shattering a window, but the damage was done. He was no longer just Elias Vance, a man trying to reclaim his stolen savings. He was Elias Vance, attempted robber, a fugitive. 3 days later, the whiskey in his canteen was gone, and the throbbing in his shoulder had become a constant, fiery drumbeat. The wound was infected. He could feel the heat of it radiating through his filthy shirt. The world began to tilt and swim at the edges of his vision. He needed shelter, water, something to stave off the collapse he felt looming. It was the smell of wood smoke that guided him, a thin gray ribbon against the vast blue sky. He followed it down into a sheltered valley where a creek meandered through a lush pasture, and there it was. A log cabin, larger than most, with a stone chimney and a porch that wrapped around the front. A well-tended garden sprawled to one side, and a sturdy barn stood proudly a little way off. It wasn't just a homestead. It looked like a home. It was the kind of place he'd once dreamed of building before the mines, before the greed, before everything went wrong. Desperation overpowered caution. He urged the bay forward, his good hand tight on the reins. As he drew closer, he saw a man splitting wood by the barn, a man with a quiet strength in his posture, a face weathered by sun and sorrow. He paused his work, watching Elias's approach with a stillness that was more assessment than threat. He reined in his horse, the effort making black spots dance in his vision. "Water," he croaked, his voice rough from disuse and pain. I can pay." He fumbled for a coin in his pocket, a pathetic gesture. The man set his axe down carefully. "Don't need your money." His gaze was sharp, missing nothing. The dust, the unnatural angle of Elias's shoulder, the pallor of his skin. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Elias lied, the words tasting like ash. "Infection's never nothing." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Name's Josiah Brennan. This is my land. You'd best get down from there before you fall." As if on cue, a wave of dizziness washed over Elias. He swayed in the saddle, his grip on the pommel slipping. The world tilted, the green of the pasture and the blue of the sky smearing into a nauseating swirl. The last thing he felt was the jarring impact of the ground before darkness swallowed him whole. He woke to the scent of lavender and soap and the soft crackle of a fire.
He was lying in a bed, covered by a thick wool blanket. The fiery agony in his shoulder had been reduced to a dull, manageable throb, tightly bound with clean linen. A woman stood by the hearth, pouring steaming water from a kettle into a basin. She had a quiet grace about her, a face that spoke of having endured its own storms, but had found calm on the other side. She turned and saw his open eyes. "Welcome back," she said, her voice calm and low. "We gave you quite a scare." She brought him a tin cup of water. "Drink, slowly." Elias obeyed, the cool water a miracle on his parched throat. My horse?" "Safe in the barn, fed and brushed down. My husband is seeing to him." She placed the cup on a small table beside the bed. "I'm Anna Brennan." Brennan, so the man was her husband. "Elias," he managed, giving only his first name. A habit of secrecy, hard to break. "Thank you, ma'am. You've a fever, and that wound was in a bad way. Josiah cleaned it and packed it with honey and yarrow. It'll draw out the poison." She didn't ask how he got it, not yet. Her silence was a mercy. Josiah entered then, ducking slightly under the low doorway. He carried the scent of hay and horses with him. He looked at Elias, his expression unreadable. "You're lucky. The bullet passed clean through, but luck runs out if you don't tend to things properly." Elias looked from one to the other. They were a unit, a pair of bookends, holding up a world of quiet strength. He felt like a shattered vase in comparison. I wasn't robbing anyone," he whispered, the confession torn from him by their unassuming kindness. It was a weak, partial truth, but it was all he had. Anna's gaze was steady. "We didn't ask." "But you're thinking it." Josiah pulled up a chair and sat, the wood creaking under his weight. "I'm thinking a man doesn't get a wound like that falling off his horse. I'm thinking he's running from something. What I'm not thinking is that it's any of my business unless you bring your trouble to my door or to my wife." The message was clear. Sanctuary was offered, but it was conditional. This was their haven, hard won, and they would protect it. For 3 days Elias drifted in and out of sleep. Anna brought him broth and bitter tea. Josiah checked his bandages with a practical, efficient gentleness. They spoke little, their presence a quiet, constant reassurance. They learned their rhythms, the pre-dawn stirrings, the shared meals at the rough-hewn table, and the way they would sit on the porch in the evening, not needing words. On the 4th morning, Elias felt strong enough to sit in a chair by the fire. His shoulder was still tender, but the fever was gone. Anna handed him a small, carved wooden bird, its wings spread as if in flight. "It's beautiful," he said, turning it over in his hands. "For my sister," Anna said softly, a distant look in her eyes. "Josiah carved it, a reminder that even after the hardest things, there's still a chance to fly somewhere new." Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at Josiah, who was watching him from the doorway, his arms crossed. Hanging from a peg by the door was another carving, a small, child-sized horse, its wood smoothed by time and touch. "Because somebody should have stopped for me once," Josiah said quietly, as if answering a question Elias did not dare to ask out loud. They didn't. The simple statement landed in the quiet room like the weight of scripture. It wasn't an accusation or a demand for explanation. It was a statement of principle, the very foundation upon which this house, this life, had been rebuilt from ashes. Elias looked down at the carved bird in his hand, then out the window at the sun-drenched valley, and for the first time since Cheyenne, the storm inside him began to quiet. He was safe, and in that safety, the full, crushing weight of what he had almost become began to settle on him. He had a choice now: keep running into the winter of his own making, or learn what it meant to be still, to be cared for, to perhaps one day earn the peace that these two people so freely offered. He met Josiah's gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away. The running was over. Now, the harder part began: the staying.
The rhythm of work became Elias's new penance. The Brennan ranch, which at first seemed a tranquil haven, revealed itself as a world of unending, purposeful labor. For a man used to the chaotic clamor of mining camps and the frantic pace of flight, the slow, deliberate chores were a foreign language. Josiah, a man of few words, was a fluent speaker. His shoulder still ached, a persistent reminder of his past, but Elias refused to stay idle. On the fifth morning, he found Josiah by the woodpile, his axe rising and falling in a steady metronomic rhythm. "Let me," Elias said, his voice firmer than it had been since his arrival. Josiah paused mid-swing and looked at him. He didn't ask if Elias was strong enough. He simply handed him the axe. It was heavier than it looked, the hickory handle smooth and warm from Josiah's grip. "The trick," Josiah said, stepping back, "ain't in the force, it's in the aim. You let the weight of the head do the work. You're just guiding it home." Elias nodded, setting a log on the stump. His first swing was awkward, overcompensating with his good arm. The axe blade bit into the wood at a wrong angle and stuck fast. He grunted, yanking it free. Shame heated his neck. Even this simple thing was beyond him. He glanced at Josiah, expecting impatience or disdain. He saw neither. Josiah just leaned against the split-rail fence, his gaze steady. Again. Elias reset, took a breath, and tried to remember the effortless arc of Josiah's swing. Let the weight of the head do the work. He swung again. This time, the blade found its mark with a clean thwack, and the log split neatly into two halves. A small, surprising surge of satisfaction went through him. It was the first thing he'd completed, start to finish, in weeks that hadn't ended in disaster. "That's it," Josiah said, a note of quiet approval in his voice. He didn't linger. He moved off toward the barn, leaving Elias to the pile. For the next hour, the only sounds were the crack of splitting wood, the rasp of his own breath, and the distant call of a hawk. With each log, the movement became more natural, the ache in his shoulder a familiar companion rather than a screaming protest. The physical exhaustion was a cleansing fire, burning away the jittery fear that had been his constant shadow. This fatigue was honest. He could see its results in the growing stack of firewood. At midday, Anna brought him a cup of cool water from the spring. She surveyed his work with a critical but not unkind eye. "You've made a dent," she observed, handing him the cup. "It's something," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "It's everything," she corrected gently. "A warm house, a cooked meal, a defense against the cold. It's not just wood." She looked toward the pasture where Josiah was mending a fence. "When I first came here, I didn't know one end of a hoe from the other. I felt useless. But Josiah, he teaches by letting you try, by trusting you with the small things first." Elias followed her gaze. He saw the two crosses under the pines, a silent testament to the loss that had shaped this man. "He doesn't say much," he replied. "He doesn't have to," Anna said. "His actions have a language all their own." She took the empty cup. "Lunch is soon. Don't work yourself into the ground. The wood will still be there tomorrow." As she walked back to the cabin, Elias felt the truth of her words. This place, their kindness, wasn't a passive thing.
It was an active force built on split logs, mended fences, and shared meals. It was a trust he was terrified of breaking. That afternoon, Josiah put him to work mucking out the horse stalls. It was dirty, smelly work, but Elias didn't complain. The gelding, whom he'd neglected in his flight, nudged his shoulder gently as he worked, as if in thanks. The simple, uncomplicated affection from the animal was another balm on his raw spirit. Later, as they sat on the porch shelling peas for dinner, the silence between them felt different. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of shared labor. "You're handy with your hands," Josiah remarked, his fingers moving deftly through the bowl. "When they're not full of trouble." Elias looked down at his own hands, now calloused and stained with dirt and resin. Was a miner before. Used to working with pick and shovel. This, he gestured vaguely at the ranch, the garden, the woodpile. This is different. It's building something up, not just tearing things out of the ground. Josiah nodded slowly. A man can get lost in a hole in the ground. Out here he looked out over the valley, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Out here you have to look up. You have to see the sky, the weather coming. You have to care for things that depend on you. The words settled heavily on Elias. He had been responsible for no one but himself, and he had failed even at that. The image of the young teller's terrified face flashed behind his eyes. The boy's name was Caleb. He'd seen it on the brass nameplate, Caleb. "I scared someone," Elias said, the words quiet, torn from the deepest part of his shame. He stared at the pea pod in his hand, unable to look at Josiah. "I went to the bank. I just wanted my own money, the little I had left from the mines. But the boy at the counter, he recognized me from a wanted poster. For a fight I was in. A man got hurt. I didn't mean for it, but my face was on that paper." He risked a glance. Josiah's expression hadn't changed, but he'd stopped shelling. He was listening. "I panicked. I had my gun in my coat, just for, I don't know, for feeling safe. I pulled it out, just to scare him, to make him be quiet. I never even aimed. My hand was shaking so bad. It went off. The shot hit the window. I saw the glass explode. I saw the pure terror on his face. I took the money, my own money, and ran. I'm a thief, and worse, I'm a coward." The silence that followed was profound. The only sound was the whisper of the wind in the pines. Elias felt naked, judged. He waited for the dismissal, for the cold request to leave. Josiah picked up another pea pod. "A man's past is a heavy load," he said, finally, his voice low and even. "You can either let it crush you where you stand, or you can set it down and use the strength you spent carrying it to build something new. And if the law comes, if I brought that load here to your door, then we'll face it," Josiah said, meeting his gaze at last. His eyes were the color of the granite in the hills, steady and unyielding. "But running from a thing don't make it gone. It just makes you tired. You've been given a chance to stop running, Elias. What you do with that chance is on you." Before Elias could respond, the sound of horsebeats carried up from the trail below, a single rider moving at a brisk trot. Josiah stood, his body tensing almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Elias, a silent warning in his eyes. The outside world, with all its complications and consequences, was riding up their path. The fragile peace of the last few days trembled in the balance. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. The axe felt 1,000 miles away. All he had in his hands were a few pea pods and the crushing weight of his confession. The rider was still too far to identify, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. Friend or foe? A neighbor or a U.S. Marshal? Josiah stood, his body tensing almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Elias, a silent warning in his eyes. "We'll see," he said, more to himself than to Elias. "We'll see what the world brings us now."
The rider who emerged from the twilight was not the hardened lawman Elias's fear had conjured. It was a boy, barely older than the teller from Cheyenne, his face still soft with youth beneath a dusting of trail dirt. He wore a deputy sheriff's star pinned awkwardly to his vest, and he held his reins with a nervous tightness. "Mr. Brennan," the boy called out, his voice cracking slightly as he reined in his horse. Josiah stepped forward, his posture relaxing from its defensive alertness into a more neutral stance. "Deputy Miller, what brings you out this far? Your pa know you're here?" The boy, Deputy Miller, flushed. "Yes, sir. Sent me to deliver a message." His eyes flickered from Josiah to Anna, who had appeared in the doorway, and then to Elias, who remained frozen on the porch, a handful of unshelled peas clutched in his fist. The deputy's gaze lingered on Elias a moment too long, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He looked back at Josiah. "There's a wire from Cheyenne, sir. Sheriff thought you should know, seeing as you get folk passing through sometimes. They're looking for a fella. Name of Elias Vance." The air went out of Elias's lungs. He felt the porch planks sway beneath his feet. This was it, the end of the road. He set the bowl of peas down carefully, his movements slow and deliberate, preparing to stand, to surrender. Josiah didn't even glance back at him. "What's he wanted for?" His voice was calm, conversational, as if asking about the price of grain. "Attempted bank robbery," the deputy said, puffing out his chest slightly with the importance of his news. "Shot up the place and stole a pile of money. Armed and dangerous, they say." Armed and dangerous. The words were a grotesque caricature of the trembling, desperate man he had been. Elias closed his eyes, waiting for Josiah to point a finger and say, "He's right here." Instead, Josiah let out a soft, dismissive grunt. "Cheyenne's a long way off. You tell your pa I'll keep an eye out, but we don't see many strangers fit that description. Most folks around here are just looking for a quiet piece of land." Elias's eyes snapped open. He stared at Josiah's broad back, stunned. He was lying. For him. The Deputy Miller nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Figured as much. Just doing right due diligence." He tipped his hat to Anna. "Ma'am, sorry to bother your evening." With a final, curious glance at Elias, he turned his horse and nudged it back down the trail, the hoofbeats fading slowly into the chirping of the evening crickets. The silence he left behind was thick and heavy. Elias couldn't move. He watched as Josiah turned around, his face unreadable in the fading light. "You lied," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. "To a lawman." "I gave him an answer," Josiah corrected, walking back to the porch. He stopped at the bottom step, looking up at Elias, "The one that kept the peace." "For now." Anna came to stand beside her husband, her expression not of fear, but of a deep, weary understanding. "He'll be back, Josiah, or another one will. A wire means they're looking seriously." "I know," Josiah said, his gaze still locked on Elias. "Which means you've got a choice to make, Elias Vance, and you've got to make it tonight." Elias finally found the strength to stand. The confession had been a release. But this protection he had not earned was a weight of a different kind. "I should turn myself in. Clear your name. I won't have you branded as harboring a criminal." "That's one way," Josiah acknowledged. "The running ends in a cell, or maybe at the end of a rope." He stepped onto the porch, closing the distance between them. "But that's the easy way, for you." "Easy?" Elias barked a bitter laugh. "How was that easy?" "Because it ends things," Anna said softly. "There's no more uncertainty, no more fear of the knock on the door. It's over. But it's an ending without hope. Josiah gestured to the axe leaning against the woodpile, to the freshly cleaned stalls in the barn. The hard way is staying. The hard way is facing what you did, not in a courtroom, but in this valley, every day. It's working to become a man who wouldn't have done that. It's earning back a piece of your soul, chip by chip, with every log you split and every fence post you set. That's a harder sentence than any judge will give you. Elias looked from Josiah's resolute face to Anna's compassionate one. He thought of the carved bird, a symbol of flight from grief. He thought of the weight of the axe, the honesty of sweat and sore muscles. This was the ridgeline way he had stumbled into, not a hiding place, but a forge. "They'll come for me," he said, the truth of it settling in his stomach like a stone. "They might," Josiah agreed. "And if they do, we'll face it together. We'll tell them the truth, that you came here a broken man, and you chose to stay and be remade. That you work honest, you cause no trouble, and you're under the protection of this household. It might not matter to them, but it matters here." Under the protection of this household. The words were a shield, stronger than any he could have forged himself. "Why?" Elias asked, the same question Anna had once asked Josiah on a snowy platform. "Why would you risk that for me?" Josiah's eyes drifted to the two crosses under the pines. "A man is not defined by the worst moment of his life, son. He's defined by what he does after. I wasn't there for my family when they needed me most. Maybe this is my chance to be there for someone who does." The choice was laid bare before him. The easy end or the hard beginning. Elias took a deep, shuddering breath, filling his lungs with the clean, pine-scented air of the valley. He looked out at the land, no longer just a hiding spot, but a challenge, a promise. "The wood pile is still only half done," he said, his voice finding a new steadiness. "And you mentioned the roof on the smokehouse needs patching before the next rain." A slow, rare smile touched Josiah's lips. It was a smile of profound understanding. "That it does." Anna reached out and gently pried the forgotten pea pods from Elias's stiff fingers. "Then we'd better finish supper," she said, her own smile warm and welcoming. "A man needs his strength for a hard day's work tomorrow." As Elias stood on the porch between them, watching the stars prick the deep velvet of the night sky, he felt the last of his running spirit quiet. The law was still out there, a distant threat on the horizon. The shame of Cheyenne was a scar he would always carry, but they were no longer chains. He was Elias Vance. He was a man who had done a terrible thing, but he was also the man who had split a cord of wood, who had cared for a tired horse, and who had been offered a second chance by two people who saw a flicker of something worth saving in his haunted eyes. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't lost anymore either. He was here. He was home. And for the first time in a long, long time, the future was not something to be feared, but something to be built, one honest swing of the axe at a time.